What's good, folks? How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? I know that we got the short sleeve shirts back. I was out of them for a few days. Thank you for the super hearts. Appreciate it. Good to see everybody on this Tuesday afternoon. New Human Events article. CNN's racist defense of Kamala Harris. The article is what I think is actually a fairly novel take from the right about the nature of the attempts by CNN to portray Don Jr. as a birther, right? They really want to do that. They really want to do that. And they thought that when Don Jr. retweeted this tweet by Ali that argued that Kamala Harris was not an African American because she's of a mix of Indian and Jamaican background, that claim itself was a birther conspiracy. And so to start, there's an interesting gaslighting that's obviously happening when you say something like that. Because the debate about African American identity is not a debate with a right or wrong answer. Right? Clearly, there's just contestation that's happening within the Black community that says, do we conceptualize the Black community as everybody who is Black? Do we think about it as about melanin, as the group says, or do we think about it in terms of lineage, i.e., who are the descendants of the people who were oppressed and had to deal with the ugly history that America had when it came to race? And that's a really serious debate. And people like Don Lemon took the side that Ali made an argument a few days ago, that side being that those individuals who are actually descended from those who lived during slavery and Jim Crow have a real claim to the term African American that somebody who is not descended from those people have. And to be frank, the purpose of making that claim is ultimately about reparations. They're trying to say that, for example, Kamala Harris shouldn't get reparations because she's not the descendant of somebody who was wronged by the United States government or slavery within the United States. Whereas somebody like, I don't know, Don Lemon, that has a different claim to that. But when it came to the CNN commentators, they didn't really care about that at all. If you watched Chris Cuomo yesterday, he talked about Don Jr. retweeting a tweet. He didn't mention who the author of the tweet was, or that the author of the tweet was himself African American. When Chris Cillizza and Donny O'Sullivan, what a weird name, Donny. Well, don't be like Donny, and not, Donny himself didn't even include a link to the tweet and didn't even mention at all that an African American had written it. Cillizza included a link to the tweet, but did not mention that an African American had written it. And none of them mentioned the origin of this debate. They all tried to frame it. Indeed, Donny's article was about how it festered in the swamps of pro-Trump Twitter, how it festered on the Donald subreddit. Ooh, sounds nasty. In reality, the organization that proffered this nuanced and narrower conception of African American identity is a group called ADOS, or American Descendants of Slavery. And their argument is fairly straightforward, that the people who are descendants of slaves in America have a stronger claim on essentially both the name of being African American, that identity, as well as essentially a different moral claim when it comes to things that we have in our society like affirmative action, etc. And that's a fairly compelling argument to me. Like, I ultimately don't think reparations are a good idea, but certainly when it comes to the question of identity, people should be able to self-identify. So I wrote an article on Human Events. It's up there. I want you all to share it out. There are two basic things in this article that I identify that I don't think most people have done. Most people have said, look, they're being really hypocritical. They're trying to hide that Don Lemon said it before. They're attacking Donald Trump Jr. unfairly. They're gaslighting, blah, blah, blah. That's all true. But there's two things that I think Chris Cuomo, Donny, and Chris Cillizza are doing that nobody's talking about. One, they're co-opting a debate about African American identity by calling one side of that debate a conspiracy theory, right? What they are effectively saying is that the founders of ADOS, people who are graduates of Howard, people who are serious in the movement of reparations, are spreading a conspiracy theory when they claim that Kamala Harris is not African American, making an argument about what the proper breadth of the narrowness of identity is. Resolving it in that way is not their place. Normally, I'm not a big fan of identity politics, but if identity ever has a place in any sort of substantive debate, your identity should be relevant in a debate about the breadth of a particular identity. Like, I don't know what the correct answer is who should be qualified as African American. Not my place to say. I don't know. So Media Matters speculated that ADOS is a Russian op. A whole bunch of white people deciding to accuse black people of being Russian conspiracy theorists seems, I don't know, a little bit racist to me, just saying, right? Just a little bit racist to say, to erase this movement and to essentially resolve what is a pretty fraught and challenging and nuanced question of identity, right? I mean, that's what it is. It is a nuanced question about identity to say, you know, and I mean, imagine comparing it to something like birtherism. You know, I was joking, this is the first conspiracy theory where nobody actually disagrees about what the facts are, right? Like, literally, it's on Wikipedia. Kamala Harris had an Indian mother and a Jamaican father. No one disagrees about that. The only question that is now a conspiracy theory is the proper interpretation of that particular fact. Weird, right? It's weird. How did that suddenly become a conspiracy theory? How did that become birtherism? And why are a bunch of white people telling a bunch of black people that their arguments about identity are rooted in conspiracy thinking and birtherism? It's racist. It's offensive, right? No. Now, second, here's the second point I want to make. A lot of people have said that CNN is being hypocritical, that I'm not pointing out that Don Lemon made the exact same argument 5 months ago, which is true. But there's something a little more sinister going on. They didn't mention Ali Alexander in terms of his name, right? Or they mentioned him, maybe they mentioned him briefly. None of the CNN articles mentioned him. They put the tweet up there, but they didn't mention he's African American. They didn't mention ADOS or its founders, and they didn't mention Don Lemon. None of them even talked about the fact that Don Lemon had made the contrary argument here. None of these three white male CNN anchors had mentioned Don Lemon. I feel a little sorry for Don Lemon because I think what that is there's a term for that. It's erasure, right? A common and fair critique of, you know, essentially it comes from a little further to the left. You gotta remember, use intersectionality can be useful. Is that one of the major intersectional critiques of, say, white feminism, for example, or the feminist movement more broadly, is that it centers the experience of white women over black women. That's not an unfair criticism in a world where everybody who runs it is white women, and they're completely ignoring the experience of black women, right? So, and by that they talk about erasing the black female experience from the white feminist movement. What Donny and Chris Cillizza and what's the other guy? Oh yeah, Chris Cuomo are doing by saying that, by refusing to point out that Ali is African American, by ignoring their own colleague, and by ignoring ADOS, is they are erasing the voices and the arguments of African Americans who disagree with them. As white males who have no role and no standing and no experience that would be relevant to a discussion about African American identity, they are not only asserting their right to define one side of that identity as one side of that question, rather, as a conspiracy theory. They're also asserting their right to erase and ignore arguments made by African Americans that contradict what they're saying, including their own anchor. Like, I can't imagine Don Lemon is thrilled to watch his colleagues in their bloodlust to attack Donald Trump Jr., in their haste, completely ignore that his argument. You haven't seen Don Lemon come out and contradict himself. Like, Don Lemon, trust me, Don Lemon believes this shit, right? Don Lemon believes what he was saying, and they're erasing his voice. When you have the arrogance to think that as a white man, you have the right to impose your view of a question of African American identity on African Americans, one, and two, that you have the right to erase African American voices from a debate about African American identity, we have a word for that. It's racist. It's racist. What CNN did, that was a racist attack, and it was racist erasure. In their haste, in their bloodlust to get after Donald Trump Jr., they actually fell into a trap. Most Republicans want to point out the double standard. Most Republicans want to point out the hypocrisy. Most Republicans want to point out the gaslighting. That's all there. That's true. But there's a truth, even as a conservative, there's a truth to the argument that your identity should be central in a debate about the breadth of identity. Like, again, I as a white person am not in a position at all to talk about what African American identity should be. Not in a position at all. I can say, here's one argument, here's another argument. I don't know what the right answer is. It's not really my place to decide. You know, while identity is generally, it's generally ad hominem, it generally should be irrelevant in most debates about substance, most debates about policy. Identity certainly should be relevant in a debate about identity, right? And there's another angle to this, one of the reasons I'm sympathetic to the ADOS perspective. So, for example, I have German citizenship. Most people don't know this. I don't speak a word of German, but I have a German passport. I think it's over there. I'll show you. I think this is expired, but you can see it. See this Republic Deutschland right there? And this is me looking much younger, right? William Isaac Chamberlain. This is a German European Union passport. I got that because my grandmother was a German Ashkenazi Jew and left Germany in 1936. And as a way of saying sorry for that fact, the German government has a program where it offers descendants of German Jews who left because of the Holocaust or left because of the rise of the Nazi Party, that they can apply and get citizenship fairly cheaply. Actually, it only costs like a couple thousand euros, I think, at the time back in I think I got it in like 2010, roughly in about 10 years ago. I still need to re-up the passport because I don't use it that much. But the concept being that, again, it's not that every Jewish person is entitled to a passport under this law, right? It's just not true. But if you were a German Jew, if you were a descendant of German Jews, then you are in fact entitled to it because lineage matters. So I am sympathetic to an argument that says that we need to carefully construct the identity about what it means to be African American because there are different demands and there are different, essentially, measures to restore justice that those people might be entitled to that people who are, say, of Caribbean descent are not. Or rather, that the people of Caribbean descent have a different claim to make on a different government because that's where the oppression came from. So, somebody says there should be a general objective reality even with identity. See, that's the thing. This is one of the reasons I actually disagree with you. They're calling it a conspiracy theory because they're asserting that there is an objective reality about who is an African American and who's not. And the whole point of American descendants of slavery is to problematize the common understanding of what it means to be an African American so as to further a particular policy objective. And the identity, this is one of those cases where there isn't a right answer about who exactly qualifies as African American, which is why it's so facile and so rude and so arrogant for three white men to come along and say that it's a conspiracy theory. And that's not right. So I'll take questions. I've also written an article to this effect. I just shared it on Twitter. So if you guys want to, push this out and see if we can't get traction with this narrative, it is about essentially the racist erasure that happened here. But I'll take questions in the interim. John Roberts. See, here's the difference. Again, I've talked about this before. To me, sometimes there's an easy out-lefting argument that really puts your enemies on the defensive, and I never shy away from using it when it's there, and when it's right. And here's this case. Jason asked, am I going to the social media party at the White House? Yes, I am. I have an invite. Sorry, folks that don't, but I do have an invite. Am I on Adderall? I took an Adderall this morning. I take Adderall every day. So that's the thing. I have attention deficit disorder. It's a real thing. I've had it since I've had it my whole life. I got diagnosed the first time when I was 20 and recently started taking it again because while I thought I had essentially beaten it because I went through law school. So it's just, can I beat your date? It's not a date thing. Donkton will be there. He will indeed. Looking forward to that. So he says, I don't know. I haven't publicly discussed it, but yes, I am going. Enough people are publicly talking about having gotten invites that I feel comfortable being like, yes, I will be at the social media summit. Will I go to Portland with Cernovich? Probably not. I do not have an Asian passport. I don't know if Cernovich was invited. So I'm not descended. That's one place I'm not descended by. If you actually look at my 23andMe, it's like half Ashkenazi Jew, half WASP. So, USA versus England soccer predictions. What? There's like women are playing soccer against each other competitively. I didn't know. I was unaware. not to be harsh, but this is one area where I will sound reactionary, which is, I'm sorry, if you're not, I'm told that we need to treat everybody the same, and that, like, that's the new left-wing thing. So if we're treating everybody the same, then I don't see why I should care about a team that can't beat the male under 15s, right? Like, if you want me to care about that, then that's a good thing. I think you're ultimately right that I probably should, but that means we need to, like, end this whole transgenderism debate too, in sports, at least. That's my judgment. Because until then, it's like, if they can't beat the men's under 15s, then we're seeing one of a not particularly impressive soccer team at the end of the day. Now, I don't know. Perhaps I shouldn't talk about that on Periscope, but that's the way I think about it. Like, I just don't, I think that's the line. Somebody says, if you were a Mattel doll, your name would be Feigned Ignatian Ken. See, here's the thing. People don't understand that actually I have a pretty nuanced view on issues of race and identity that most people wouldn't probably characterize as, like, default conservatism. But it's a pretty nuanced place. People keep saying to fix my hair. I've already done enough of that. So, like, and especially when it comes to things like, African-American identity, like, I think there's a truth to the fact that, like, Coleman Hughes had a really good speech where he makes the point, he's like, look, reparations are probably wrong for the descendants of slavery, because it's been too long. We're talking 5 generations here. That's just not meaningfully impactful, and, it's just not right to make the descendants of people who were the slaveholders 5 generations on, repay the people who weren't. But, Jim Crow was not long ago. And that's a place where I'll actually listen to arguments. So, for example, like Jim Crow, think about it. Jim Crow ended in what, 1964, effectively, with the end of the Civil Rights Act? That's what, 55 years ago? There are plenty of people alive today who lived and had to deal with the problems of Jim Crow. And, like, that's a thing that's real. And one of the things I remember, I was actually pretty persuaded by this framing. Killer Mike, who I don't normally like, but he made the point, he's like, look, we had apartheid in our country until 1964. And it's like, yeah, that was, we don't talk about it as apartheid. We talk about it as the Civil Rights era and Jim Crow. We have our own, like, oh, that's nasty. But think about how nasty people think when they think of the word apartheid, because it's like a foreign country, an evil, oppressive thing done by a foreign country. Well, in some sense, the past is a foreign country, and we did have apartheid here. I mean, in the South, at least. Not throughout the country, but in the South. And that's not trivial. Like, that's a real thing that we have to grapple with. I mean, it's good on us that we resolved it democratically with civil rights legislation, and rather than with, like a war again, like we did in the Civil War. But, there's an accounting that I don't know that we've fully done for that. That said, I think, everybody, and this is actually, it goes back to the question of, like, what does it mean to claim African-American identity, and why does that matter? Because there actually is this historical consequence that relates to African-American identity. And so maybe we need to construe African-American identity narrowly so that we can properly identify where there actually has been a historical injustice that can truly be remedied in 2019. And when everybody tries to get a claim on African-American identity, despite not having that legacy, you see where the problem can come in. You see where there's actually a really good argument. And it's why, again, why it is so offensive, why it is genuinely racist for Chris Cuomo, Donnie, and Chris Cillizza to pretend that this argument is only made by, like, conspiracy theorists, that it's birtherism, and to erase the voices of people like Don Lemon, erase the voices of people like Ali, etc. So, that's my point there. Somebody says, isn't it truly vile to co-opt the African-American experience? It is, actually, right? This is one of the reasons why what Rachel Dolezal did was so offensive, right? She's co-opting the identity that is not her identity. And I'm sympathetic to claims, especially that one particular one, that claim of identity. So he says, would you say there may not be a clear right answer, but there may be a clear wrong answer on African-American identity? Sure. I mean, there's answers that nobody would agree on, like that white people, like Rachel Dolezal, could be African-American. Like, clearly not. But in terms of the question about exactly where to draw the boundaries, it's a fuzzy question, which is why it's not a conspiracy theory. Somebody says, these are the same people who made excuses for Elizabeth Warren calling herself a Native American. Of course they did. Well, I mean, it's actually consistent, right? They're just bleeding. If ever the actual boundaries of a particular identity become problematic politically, then what Democrats will do is they'll ignore it, and they'll essentially call you a racist for even bringing up the fact that there is this attempt at co-opting an identity that is not yours. Right? So, That's what I got. All right, that seems good enough. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, the bottom right corner screen, hit the follow button. Follow me on Twitter at Chamberlain. www.humanevents.com/members to join the membership and support best conservative publication online at the moment. And share this article out. Let's put some pressure on people. Because Chris Cuomo and the rest of CNN need to be taken to task for what is an act of racist erasure. I'll talk to you later. Peace.